Homework 5.7 is working with the discriminant. The discriminant of a quadratic equation is a part of the quadratic formula. Let's remember the quadratic formula says that the solutions to the quadratic equation will be negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. The discriminant is a very key part of this. It's the part inside of the square root. This is the discriminant. The discriminant is b squared minus 4ac. And it's pretty important because if we know what the discriminant is, we know what types of numbers we have. If it's a perfect square, we can do the square root and we'll get rational numbers. If it's a negative number, well, you can't do the square root of a negative number without getting an imaginary number, and so we'll have imaginary solutions. If the discriminant is 0, the square root of 0 will be 0, and you will be adding and subtracting 0, but adding 0 doesn't do anything, subtracting 0 doesn't do anything, and so you'll end up with only one solution. So knowing what's inside the square root will give us a lot of information. Let's see how to find it. The discriminant of a quadratic equation, we first need it equal to 0, which luckily all of these first ones are. A is 6, b is negative 2, c is negative 3, and so the discriminant is going to be b squared, negative 2 times negative 2 is 4, minus 4 times 6 times negative 3. Here we have a negative times a negative. I like to multiply the negative times the negative first. I usually think it's a little bit easier. We get 4. Negative times the negative is a positive. This is 12 times 6. 4 times negative 3 is negative 4 times negative 3 is 12. 12 times 6 is 72. And so the discriminant is 76. That is the value of the discriminant. And the directions don't ask us to do anything more with it. But there are some things we should know immediately when we see square root of 76. Well, we can't take the square root of 76. It's not a perfect square. So the solutions will be irrational, meaning there will be a square root left over in the end. Also, it's a positive number, so the solutions will be real. We're not trying to do the square root of a negative number. Also, because it's not equal to 0, there will be 2 solutions. Let's see how that looks later on in this homework. The next instructions say, find the discriminant, then state the number of real and imaginary solutions. So, I'll try to help with 2 of these, or 1 of these, maybe, I don't know. We'll see how I feel. The first thing is, this is not equal to 0. You can't do the quadratic formula until it's equal to 0, and so we can't find the discriminant either. We first need to add 10 to both sides. So we get 9n squared minus 3n plus 2 equals 0, and now we can do the discriminant. Again, the discriminant is b squared minus 4ac. It's the part inside the square root. So it's going to be negative 3 squared, b squared, minus 4 times a times c. Negative 3 squared is 9. Here it's just one negative, so it's going to end up being minus. 4 times 9 is 36. 36 times 2 is 72. So we end up with 9 minus 72, which is negative 61. That is the discriminant, which was part of what it asked us to do. Find the discriminant of each equation. Great, negative 61. Then, state the number of real and imaginary zeros. Well, since this is the part inside of the square root, we'll be doing negative b plus or minus the square root of negative 61. When you do the square root of a negative, you'll end up getting an imaginary solution. It'll be both plus this imaginary number and minus this imaginary number, and so we end up with 2 imaginary solutions. 2 imaginary solutions. I actually don't love this wording. I consider these complex solutions, but we'll call them imaginary here because that's what the directions say to do. You can't actually get just one imaginary solution. The only way you get one solution is if the discriminant is equal to 0, because if the discriminant is equal to 0, you will end up having negative b plus or minus the square root of 0. Well, the square root of 0 isn't imaginary. It's real. Square root of 0 is 0. And so you'll just end up with negative b plus 0 and negative b minus 0. That's why you only end up with 1. But in the case where you have 1, it will always be one real solution. So our answers here are the discriminant is negative 61, And because the discriminant is negative 61, we have two imaginary solutions. On the back, here it says, find the discriminant, so doing the same thing, then state the number of rational, irrational, and imaginary solutions. So, again, this is not equal to 0. We can't find the discriminant yet. We're going to add 7x and add 9 to both sides of the equation, and we're going to get negative 6x squared plus 7x. There's nothing for it to combine with. Negative 6 plus 9 is plus 3, and that's equal to 0. The discriminant is going to be b squared, here's b, 49 minus 4 times a times c. Negative times a negative is a positive. It's positive 24, so it's going to be 49 plus 24 times 3 is 72. So this is 121. That's what's inside of the square root, and you can do the square root of 121. The square root of 121 is 11. And because it's a perfect square, there are going to be rational solutions. It's not negative, so it's real, and it's not 0, so there are going to be two solutions. There are two rational, real zeros solutions. So, the discriminant was 121. There were two rational real zeros because what we have is negative b plus or minus the square root of 121. It won't be imaginary because the square root is positive. There won't only be one solution because we will both be adding and subtracting a number that isn't 0. So you'll get two different solutions. And because we can do the square root of 121, it's going to be rational solutions, which means that if we were solving this, we could have factored it. That's what having rational solutions tells you, is that you could have factored it. I will help you with one of the critical thinking questions. The other one is actually already contained within this video. I mentioned it. It says, write a quadratic equation that has two imaginary solutions. So what I know is that the thing inside the square root, b squared minus 4ac, has to be negative. Because if this number is negative, we will take the square root and get the square root of a negative number will be imaginary. So to make it have imaginary solutions, I need b squared minus 4ac to be less than 0. So that tells me that b squared has to be smaller than 4ac. So there are a ton of different solutions, but I know that b squared, b has to be pretty small, and a times c has to be pretty big. So I'm just going to pick 10x squared plus 2x plus, I don't know, 500 equals 0. I know that this will have two imaginary solutions because b squared is only 4. When I subtract 4 times 10 times 500, I will get a very, very negative number, and so I will be getting the square root of a negative, and we'll be getting two imaginary solutions. You better not use my example. If you use my example, you should expect to get a 0 on your homework. You should understand how this works and make sure you get your own quadratic equation with two imaginary solutions. Also, make sure you end up getting number 24. Again, the solution's contained somewhere in this video. I hope